As you start to build your podcast, it's a really good idea to consider your end goal, thinking about those KPIs that you want to set out. And the reason why that's really a great idea in order to set those KPIs is that you want to set up the structure of your podcast in a way where your audience knows who you are from the very beginning. So let's say that you are a personal trainer and you are about to start a podcast that is all about muscle building, for example. You can obviously, you want to be interviewing people, for example, you get to choose what your format is and everything. But ultimately, a really great idea from the very beginning is that you want to set a lead magnet, for example, because you want to start building that email list from the very beginning. And that establishes you as someone who is offering a service, right? So that you can even show that you are someone that they can interact with outside of the podcast space. So having that lead magnet, let's say 5 secret hacks to building muscle quickly. That's a perfect example of a lead magnet that you can throw into your show notes from the very first episode, and then you're creating that email list as you go.
Welcome to another episode of the Health Coach Academy podcast. I'm your host, Omar Cumberbatch of OmarCumberbatch.com. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am going to be introducing one of my new favorite people on earth. Her name is Jamie Kennedy, and she is a podcaster just like myself. And wow, talk about getting my selfish questions answered. She really kills it in this episode, and I know that the audience is going to absolutely love her because she just breaks down a lot of things about the podcasting space that even myself, doing this for so many years and just this podcast alone has over 200 episodes. This podcast burns fat with, co-host Lori Shemmick has over 200 episodes. And, I had some iterations in the past. So we're talking about 500, maybe 600 episodes of podcasting. And I learned a lot of new things. So it's amazing that someone can just jump on the show and spread so many interesting insights into this space. And you know how passionate I am about podcasting and how we can use it as a tool for marketing and also being an expert in our space. So I think you're going to love her. She's fantastic. And, all her information in the show notes is going to be amazing. She gives away a lot of freebies that are very valuable resources for health coaches and anyone who's interested in a podcast. So please take a look at that. That's going to be on OmarCumberbatch.com. As always, please leave a rating and review on iTunes so I can continuously get excellent guests like Jamie on the show. And I really appreciate all of you and all of your support. So let's jump into it. Hey, Jamie, how are you today? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. How are you, Omar?
Oh, fantastic. I'm always excited to talk to another podcaster, especially who's doing so well in the podcasting space. And the audience knows that I have a bunch of selfish questions for any of my guests, but especially you being a podcast, I'm really excited about that. And then we'll definitely dive into some topics that I know the audience is going to love because you're very much someone who is very relatable to us. You're in the health and wellness space. You're doing a great job in marketing. So I just want to give you an opportunity to tell your origin story. Just tell us everything about you, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Okay, great. My name is Jamie. I am a podcast producer, and I actually run a full service podcast agency. And I essentially help health, fitness, and wellness brands create either branded podcasts or get themselves featured on other podcasts as a guest. And then also, in addition to that, offering advertising campaign services. So helping health, fitness, and wellness brands advertise their product or service on other podcasts as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
And so just a little bit more about me. So essentially, I do come from the marketing world. I started my career kind of as in the health, fitness, and wellness spaces. I used to run content management, social media, etc., for gyms as well as yoga studios. And essentially, what that came to was the idea that podcasting is a marketing tool. It is a strategy. And I really wanted to niche down into that space just because I felt like it's a really exciting place to be. It's everyone says it's saturated, but it's the exact opposite at the moment in terms of the fact that there's only about 350,000 active podcasts right now, including yours, Omar. And compare that to 51 million active YouTube channels right now. So the difference is so huge. So even though there's, 4 or 5 million podcasts, a lot of those aren't active. And then in addition to that, that's just so minimal compared to the other social media channels out there.
Right. So,
yeah.
So that's interesting. So we definitely get into one of my first questions is like, how did you discover, recognize that podcasting had all this power? But I want to know if you'd subscribe to, I don't know if you've heard Alex Herbosi's statement about podcasting.
Oh, no. Tell me what it is.
Yeah. What I'll do, if I get it, I'll share it with you also, just so you have it, because I think this was like one of the most ridiculous statistics ever. To be in the top 1% of podcasting, and I know statistics get to prove anything, so I'll give them some grace with this. You only have to have 21 episodes.
Oh, wow.
But when you look, that's not really so far-fetched when you look at it. Most podcasts don't get past the 21st episode.
Wow.
Unbelievable. So one of your marketing tools, I guess you could show as well, is like if you can get your client to 21 episodes, they're a top 1% podcast.
Yes. And what's so interesting about that is there's a lot of us, especially, health and fitness and wellness coaches, will spend so much time and energy on their social media every week, their Instagram, their TikTok, Facebook, all of these things where, as you know, I don't know if you're experiencing this, but engagement is just so hard to come by on these platforms, right? But we still spend so much time on it. And yet with a podcast, somehow we expect it to just be an overnight success. Like no matter what, it's like, okay, granted, there is a lot of time and energy that you spend producing a podcast. Absolutely. But it's really no different than what you do investing your time in something like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. And so it really, it's just if you can focus your attention on a podcast and continue to build at it, to your point, I guess I can't believe, 21 episodes and you can be in the top 1% of all efforts put in to podcasting. And that's what you need to do in order to create that loyal audience, that the listeners that just love and respect you and are excited for you to continue to keep going and keep on sharing your knowledge with them.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating because like you said, you're just putting your energy into a particular area instead. And to be honest, like the engagement I've always gotten through podcasting has always been way more positive and more, the relationships are just better, right? Like you're actually having a conversation with a person. I mean, we're going to hopefully have a conversation for another, 30, 35 minutes. You can't get that on any other platform. Mm-hmm. And the connections that you make with people are so powerful. I guess what I wanted to do is, go back to the question that I initially wanted to ask you is like, when did you recognize that podcasts were such a powerful marketing strategy? And I guess one of the other things is, I mean, there's so many elements to podcasting, but how do you tell like a potential client who's interested in creating a podcast, like what the first step actually should be?
Yeah. So the way that I really got into podcasting specifically was I was working with a client, a global health club gym chain, Virgin Active. And it was about the time of COVID, and they had initially come up with this idea that they wanted to be more than just your standard gym marketing messaging, which is, come into the gym and lose weight, get that summer body. It's always about losing fat loss and all of these things that are very superficial. And what this gym really wanted to capture was that working out is about so much more than just your physical body. It's about your mental health and it's about your social health and all of these 7 dimensions of well-being, right? So what they decided to do was they said, okay, the way we're going to get this message out there is we're going to have conversations with people that align with these 7 dimensions of well-being. And a podcast is the perfect place to do it, because to your point, you're having 30, 45, 60-minute conversations where you can really dive much deeper than you can in a simple Instagram post, for example. And so being able to have this space was why they chose to do a podcast. So ultimately, I became their podcast producer. We ran with this. We had 75 episodes, reached 30,000 people. And what was great was seeing what was happening inside the club. So whereas maybe there were a lot of personal trainers that were having conversations about, okay, what's your weight loss goals? Instead, these listeners of the podcast would come into the space and say, man, I just listened to that episode that was all about gut health. Like, I want to learn more about gut health. What can you teach me about that? And so these conversations started happening that were really more about wellness in general. And it was changing the conversations that were happening in the gym. So that's what I really love about podcasting. And that's ultimately why I became so passionate about it, is that it's allowing us to have deeper conversations about the things that matter most. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, the question that you asked about, how does someone get into starting a podcast for the first time or starting their own podcast? I think the biggest thing to consider is, what is going to be your niche? How are you going to attract your audience, your target audience, and bring them into your conversation and what you want to be having? Now, the special thing about podcasts that are different than other social media platforms is that you can be, or I should say a stat right now, 1 in 2 podcast listeners will actually give a brand new podcast that they've never heard before. They'll give them 5 minutes to 15 minutes in order to decide if they want to continue to listen to that podcast episode. Now compare that to like Instagram engagement, like you've got 2.5 seconds, I think, in order to, keep them entertained. So you've got 5 minutes. So what can you talk about in that 5 minutes? So I digress. But if you can find a niche that you can really dive into and that you feel really confident and excited about, that is a really great first step to start. I do offer, I'm wondering if I should share this with your listeners, because I do offer a brainstorming guide for figuring out what your niche is. And it's kind of this proven step-by-step guide that I always do with my clients at the beginning, but I do offer it for free. So I could offer that to you as a link in the show notes if that sounds like that would be interesting.
No, I think it'd be fantastic for a number of reasons. And if you have listened to the show in the past, we always, not just because we don't do many podcast specific shows, but just everything revolves around a niche. It's how to develop it, and any material or resources that can help the audience. I think that's wonderful, especially if it's in the context that it's turning right back into a podcasting scenario where, because I was doing some research on you, and it had something that I thought was really stuck out about the niche and how you should be ruthlessly specific, which I love that phrase. So yes. I'm sure that resource will help us get ruthlessly specific. And I'm really excited if you would be able to share it. That'd be great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so good. I'm so glad that we have that in common. I did see that, your episodes there were a lot of them about niche, and your listener right now is rolling their eyes at me because of course, but, no, that's so awesome that we have that in common. I know the episodes, the podcasts that really stand out are the ones that are ruthlessly specific about what they want to talk about in the space. So, if you're I might be repetitive, but if you're a yoga teacher, what could you be talking about that makes you uniquely yours? You could talk about women in the yoga space that have changed the course of it. You could be talking about Sean Korn and Catherine Budig, and there's different ways rather than just creating a podcast about yoga, you can really dive into different niches in order to make it really stand out and be special.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's like it helps to inject like, your interest in there too. And I think that's one of the things that make it easy for you to find little categories. Like you could talk, like I said, the history of it. It's highlighting specific individuals who took it to another level, the actual practice of it. So there's a lot of avenues to it, and you don't have to necessarily be very broad about it either. So that's the thing. And I saw like some interesting statistics that you were throwing up on LinkedIn about just the sheer numbers of monthly downloads. I mean, you're talking like some of those 13,000 downloads just for things that you would never imagine will catch anybody's attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one was about the history of pens or something. Yeah, it was, yeah. I've not listened to that podcast personally. But
13,000 people did. Oh, yes. 13,000 a month do.
Yes, religiously listen to that podcast because they are fascinated by the history of the pen.
Wow. Yeah, I'm going to have to listen to it and maybe ask them to be on the show or something like that.
Yeah.
How the hell did you think of this one? But yeah, it's great. What's interesting when you do have these conversations with upcoming clients, and trying to figure out what like the content structure and how do they do that in part of their goal? Like, how do you kind of lead them to see like what they would do to make the content that goes in line with their goals?
Yes. Okay. So when you're coming up with your goal in terms of your podcast, so essentially the first thing, of course, to be considering is that it is a passion project to start with, right? You want to have that idea that you are excited about it, but as you start to build your podcast, it's really a good idea to consider your end goal, thinking about those KPIs that you want to set out. And the reason why that's really a great idea in order to set those KPIs is that you want to set up the structure of your podcast in a way where your audience knows who you are from the very beginning. So let's say that you are a personal trainer and you are about to start a podcast that is all about muscle building, for example. You can obviously, you want to be interviewing people, for example, you get to choose what your format is and everything. But ultimately, a really great idea from the very beginning is that you want to set a lead magnet, for example, because you want to start building that email list from the very beginning. And that establishes you as someone who is offering a service, right? So that you can even show that you are someone that they can interact with outside of the podcast space. So having that lead magnet, let's say 5 secret hacks to building muscle quickly. That's a perfect example of a lead magnet that you can throw into your show notes from the very first episode. And then you're creating that email list as you go. So really what it's about is, and remembering though, that a podcast always evolves. So of course you can have your mission and your goal from the beginning. Yes, you want to monetize it. Yes, you want to commit to 21 episodes, for example. These different goals that you want to set, you can always evolve them and grow them as you go. I think a good example of this is when I first created my podcast, which is called Fearless Podcasting. I committed to 10 episodes because I didn't know if during everything that I have to prioritize, I had no idea if I was going to be able to get any more than 10 episodes, but I wanted to commit to 10 episodes for my audience. Once I hit 10 episodes, I thought, oh my gosh, actually, this is amazing. I'm absolutely loving this space. I love that it's giving me ideas for other social media content, right? Like it was, I do an episode about niches, for example, and then suddenly I'd have so many ideas for my LinkedIn, for my Instagram and things like that. So then I committed to 26 episodes. So the idea with your podcast is you don't need to commit to everything right away, but just have an idea of where you want it to go and what steps you need in order for you to get to that point.
No, definitely. So again, going back to that magic number, and it's an Alex Hormozi number. I don't know where he gets it from. Say just 21. What do you think is the obstacle that gets people to not get to 21?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's a couple things that I think that people underestimate in their experience of podcasting. One is how much time it will actually take you to edit or, well, I should say post-production work.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things that need to happen in order to get your podcast from recorded to up and running and released on the various listening apps. And it probably depends on how much of a perfectionist you are in the process. But essentially, you start to wonder if the time and effort that you're putting in is worth it, especially if you're not seeing those numbers climb as quickly as you would like.
Mhm.
But I think what people are really not understanding about it is that, let's say that let's say you start with 20 listens on your first episode, and then the next one you get 25, and then maybe the next one you get 30. And that might seem like slow growth compared to maybe if you're on Instagram and you get a post that all of a sudden gets 10,000 views and you think, oh, that's amazing. But the difference is that what you're not recognizing, what a lot of podcasters are that are experiencing pod fading, they're not realizing that those 20 to 25 to 30 listeners, they are highly invested in your podcast. They've chosen to spend not only just 5 minutes with you, 15 minutes with you, but potentially have spent the entire episode with you. So let's say, you do have a 30 to 45-minute episode or podcast episode. They're spending all of that time. That's an incredible amount of engagement with you as a person. So because it's not necessarily reciprocated, right? We might not be seeing those conversations happening. People might not be commenting or leaving a review. I think it's something like 1 in every 115 listens actually leave a review. So we're not seeing that immediate what's the word I'm looking for? We're not seeing that gratification. We're not seeing that immediate external gratification. So we get panicked and we think, oh, no one must be loving my content. When the truth is that they're there, they're engaged, they're excited about what they're listening to, and you just have to keep with it in order to finally hit that tipping point. So then you can really start to see the fruits of your labor and people are engaging even more. That's why things like having that lead magnet are a really good way to see how good your podcast is performing.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that about the reviews, and I know my audience is sick of this particular story, but I'll say it because someone might be listening that's never listened before. So my hero is Sean Croxton. I don't know if you know him. He was on Underground Wellness many years ago as the number one health and wellness podcast. Man, we talked about 15 years ago. And I mean, I think everything I have, I attribute to him. He inspired me to do all this, and I never left him a review. It's just and I listened to him literally every week. I reached out to him for coaching. He was my mentor, all kinds of thing. Never left a review. So it doesn't matter really about the reviews as much because it's just something that a lot of people just don't think about doing. So
yes,
you're totally 100% right on that. And
about that, I should also mention this is something that I've harped on, and everyone always seems really surprised by this fact, but the problem actually with reviews is a lot of people don't know how to leave a review on the listening apps.
It's interesting you say that because I always ask for a review on iTunes, and you don't know how many people come back. It's like, it's not working. I can't leave it. It's not doing this. So it's like, and then you start sending them elsewhere, and you may have one on Spotify, 2 on iTunes, one, and it's just like, it is a little bit difficult to get that going. I don't know why, but it is. You're absolutely right.
I actually at one point wrote a script, a very, very as simple script as I could to get people to know exactly how to leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I would be happy to share that with you if you are interested in that script.
The show notes are going to be the bomb. Yes, give us everything.
Happy to share it. I was trying really hard because it's not an easy journey. It actually is not. We've all tested it, but I particularly went through the process on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify because I wanted to show exactly how to do it. And it's actually surprisingly complicated.
Yeah. Like I can't do it on a laptop. I can only do it on my phone. So I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm missing something or I don't know. But so
Do you know what? I've actually only tried it on my phone, so I can't even confirm or deny if you can or not on the web browser. I have no
yeah,
idea.
that's another hiccup. So I get that. It is a little difficult, but what's also fascinating, I'm glad you brought up the downloads because I do want a follow up question is to say how do we get more downloads? How do we get more listeners? How do we build an audience? Um, I tell people who I coach about podcasting specifically to not look at the downloads for a while. Like, because I think honestly, that's one of the things that turn people off right away. Like, you put out those 20 something episodes and you have 20 people. And that kind of just says, I'm not doing it. Because what happens is, especially after you have a lot of episodes, that first episode sometimes has 20 and then a year later it has 200 because they listen to a new episode and the people start going back and start listening over and over again. So it's like it's kind of stick your head in the sand a little bit and don't get deterred by that immediately, you know.
Yes, I find for most of my clients that the debut episode becomes the number one downloaded episode over and over again, to your point, because people, as they find the podcast, that's often the first one that they want to listen to is the very first one,
Yeah.
which arguably can always be a little bit, nerve wracking for us podcasters who know that our first episode was not nearly as good as the latest one we recorded. But yeah, to your point, this is what I tell my clients. I tell them, so oftentimes I won't even review the first month of analytics with them. I'll review the second month of analytics with them combined with the first because, and that's, I'm just telling them all up front, but essentially what I'm trying to explain there is that we need time in order to have the listening apps even recognize a brand new podcast. Right. So oftentimes it will take my clients, their podcasts, weeks to be searchable within the listening apps. Now, granted, people are finding them through other methods, so their own promotional activity on other platforms, or their friends or their family who are searching specifically for the podcast. But gaining that searchability, that discoverability on listening apps takes time. And so ultimately, the more that you can post, the better it is. And in addition to that, Spotify and Apple Podcasts actually do they promote, or I should say they bring forth, just like any feed does, right? They'll actually bring forth pull up more discovery for podcasts that are consistent. So podcasts that produce or that do at least one episode every 14 days, so under 15 days. So they will actually push those podcasts higher. So anyone that's consistent with that, even that alone can really help you. And the longer that you go, the more discoverability you'll have as well, because ultimately these listening apps are wanting to put forward podcasts that they know are proven, that the listeners are going to hear and embrace, and that they know that there will be a new episode coming for them as well. So yeah, I think it's really smart to just not look at the download count for a while and just really focus on producing the best possible episodes that you can. I would say the one thing that might be interesting to look at quickly, not too quickly, but obviously, after 7 days or more, is to look at your average consumption rate, because that's actually something that's really great. So if you go on to things like Apple Podcasts for creators, they're going to have your average consumption rate, and you can see, oh, okay, so 85% of all people are listening to the entire episode. That's a great sign. Right. As opposed to, let's say, that listeners are only tuning in for 15%. Even in Spotify for podcasters, you can actually see exactly when people dropped off. So if you find that a lot of people are dropping off at the 2-minute mark, and that's when your trailer is done, or your intro is done, okay, well, maybe we need to shorten the intro. There's a lot of things that you can learn from your average consumption rate. So I would say that's actually more important to experience to look at from the beginning than your downloads.
Oh, that's an awesome point. Definitely. So,
And you also asked, I'm sorry, you did ask about how to increase your downloads. So
yes.
I do want to address that. One of the things that I think a lot of podcasters miss out on is the show notes. So our show notes are so important. So to explain that, the listening apps act as a search engine. So just like it is like on Google, these listening apps are actually where 40% of people find any new podcast they're going to listen to, they find them through the listening apps. So let's say that you have an episode that's all about lead generation for health coaches. Mm-hmm. You are going to want to, and I know you do, I'm just saying this in general for someone that might not know about this, but you are going to want to find every single SEO keyword that relates to lead generation that someone might be looking for when they're in the listening app. So let's say they're looking for, revenue for gyms, or they're looking for personal training business, or essentially what we want to do is we want to make sure that those keywords are in our show notes, because the show notes are searchable within the listening apps. So just that little bit of a tweak, because I think a lot of people just throw away their show notes. They just write something really, really quickly and then they just let it go, or they put in links and then they ignore the idea that actually these titles and these show notes are being used to be searched for. It's just a huge opportunity to be getting more eyes on your podcast and therefore more downloads.
Okay, so selfish question time, because what's interesting when you say that, which platform are you using to upload these podcasts to? I'm just curious about that, because then I have a question about the show notes. Like, are you using like basically the distribution center? Like I use Libsyn.
Yeah.
I was just curious, which one do you use?
Yeah, so I have clients that do use Libsyn. Libsyn is it's a great one. And they're all very happy with that. I also have clients that use Buzzsprout. That's a really good one as well. And then I personally, for my podcast, and then any clients that, if I'm going to suggest one to them for their first one, I'm going to say Acast. Okay. And the reason I like Acast is because Acast is, there's a free plan that is pretty comprehensive. Mm-hmm. And then you can also, obviously, once you start to grow, you can continue to use it. You can, basically do the premium subscription if your podcast is growing and you want to grow into it. But Acast is nice because it can remain on Acast as the distribution channel for free forever, as long as Acast is around. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like to recommend that one.
Okay. So my question, the selfish part of it is, like, when you use your episode description, do you consider that your show notes, or do you consider that just your episode's description, and then you put your show notes elsewhere?
I house the show notes in the episode description, exactly what you just said. So yeah, I think they all kind of use different, but you're right. Episode description is a great way to say another word for show notes. Mm-hmm. I think that there is an opportunity, and some of my clients actually do this, where you can expand your show notes somewhere else. So for example, you can I highly recommend pretty much using as much of I think it's 2,000 characters that we're limited. Maybe it's 4,000, somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 characters that we're limited to. I recommend using up a lot of that. So putting in a summary chock full of SEO keywords, discoverable words, also quotes and related keywords. We often throw that in there. That works really effectively. And then links, of course. And then if you wanted, you can put a link to a more comprehensive show notes, meaning maybe it's a transcription. Mm-hmm. So you could do a full transcription of your episode. And this is great for so many different levels, right? So, making it more accessible in general, but also then you're tapping into, so let's say then you put it onto your website. So you have a podcast landing page, and then you're adding that as a blog article, and you're putting your entire transcription of your podcast episode. What you're doing is you're basically opening up that discoverability to the search engines as well as the listening apps. So I might recommend just doing a blog article transcription, include all of your links on there as well, and then maybe perhaps embed a player to the full episode, let's say in Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever is preferable.
Interesting. Yeah. I think I could tweak something there. So that's very helpful, because I basically do a little, I want to say more of a generic description in the episode description. And then my show notes are housed on my website. Yeah. And that's kind of how it is. But the problem is I outsource my show notes. So someone does those for me, and I kind of do the description myself. Yeah. Thinking if I reverse it and make her help migrate it over, that might be just something that might work a little. I'll tweak it. I'll see if I get a little bit more of a push somewhere. I'd be curious to see if that is actually something that could actually benefit my podcast.
Oh, good. I hope you do it. I'd love to hear how it goes for you. A great way to test it maybe would be using something like Spotify for Podcasters. You can see if your impressions increase as you swap it around and maybe add more discoverable SEO keywords into your show notes. It might be worth it just to see, oh, wow, I'm getting more traction, because on Spotify for Podcasters, you can see the impressions now of how many people are actually finding and looking at your podcast, and then how many are converting. It's an amazing new feature on Spotify for Podcasters as of 2024.
Wow, I got to check that out. So I know I promised you, 30 to 40 minutes, and we're just burning through the show. We're at 40 already. But I do want to ask you about something that we spoke about off air, and it's about how you're utilizing targeted ads. And you said a couple of things that really were intriguing to me, and how it can be incorporated into the show, just into your podcast. So I'll let you describe it, and then I may have one or two questions, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm really excited about this. I think this is something that is brand new, and a lot of people aren't taking advantage of this yet. But I'm sure you've heard in a podcast, you've heard these advertisements that seem to be dynamically inserted, that these ads, did I say ads? These ads are dynamically inserted into the podcasts. And so some of these are host read ads, and some of these are third-party voiceover ads. And essentially what's happening now is they are allowing for advertisers to come in and advertise on various podcasts. And what I'm offering now at my full service agency is actually the opportunity to create a 30-second audio ad. And then this is dynamically inserted into various podcasts. So instead of having to get really specific on which podcast you're going to be sponsoring on, now what they're allowing is that you can actually advertise based on someone's zip code, based on someone's age, based on someone's interests. And all of these factors, what's incredible about this opportunity, especially for health coaches who have locally based clients, is now podcasting is really getting opened up to these people who might have been a little worried about getting into podcasting because isn't the listenership global, and how do I focus on just one little area? And the truth of the matter is that this is a really great opportunity, because now you can literally promote yourself to someone based off of the zip code that they're located in. So if you have a local gym, or, you're a local massage therapist or a nutritionist, and you only work with local clients, this is your opportunity to do that ad with it dynamically inserted into podcasts. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is because 95% of people have taken some action based off of a podcast ad they've heard, which is unheard of nowadays. It's just next level. So that's why I'm excited to mention that.
No, that really is. So Jamie, so it's based off I guess the listener profile of where they are.
Yes.
Wow.
So yes, it's based off of, so let's say that they're listening to Spotify or they're listening to Apple Podcasts. It's essentially, it falls a little bit into that category of, when you're talking, you're whispering in the kitchen about that, new food processor that you want. And then suddenly all of your ads on Instagram are the food processor. It's kind of along those lines. So we don't want to be, too, it's not the greatest thing, of course, that we're going down this path, but it does introduce podcasting as a huge opportunity for people that need to get their message out there about their business. And so it does target by your zip code, based off of your IP address, also on your interests. So what other podcasts are you listening to? What's going on in your life, etc.
Wow. So you basically reverse engineered the Facebook model for podcasting. I got you.
Yes. But yet podcasts are such more of a safe space at this moment for, how we are with Meta. We have our guards up when we're on Facebook now or Instagram or TikTok. We see an ad and we just kind of shut down. We're like, keep scrolling, get out of here, But with podcasts, it's still a really safe space because ultimately we're only hearing maybe an average of 4 or 5 advertisements during the entire length of a 45-minute podcast episode.
Right.
So, and we're more interested in it because it probably has something to do with the podcast that you're listening to. There's a lot of reasons why podcasts are still a really great space, and like not only just a great space, but it's expanding, it's growing like crazy. It's a good space to be at.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. I think that's a fantastic service. I'm glad that you were able to share that today. So I want to give you an opportunity to tell us all about where we can keep up with this stuff. And if anybody's interested in such a wonderful service, your social media handles, your website, any way that we can keep abreast of all the good stuff you're doing. And we really appreciate you sharing all these wonderful resources with us as well. So I'd love to give you that opportunity now and just shoot all those good things out so we can keep up with all the stuff you're up to.
Oh, great. Well, the best place to stay in touch with me is on LinkedIn. Omar mentioned a couple times I love to post on there about podcasting and marketing and anything health, fitness, and wellness related. I'm a nerd for that. And then my full service agency is called Brave Moon Podcasts. So that's bravemoonpodcasts.com. We can add that link into the show notes. And please go ahead and check that out. You can also download that niche brainstorming worksheet. I hope that is helpful to you as well. And absolutely, I'd love to chat with you. Feel free to pop into my messages and we'll have a conversation.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks so much for jumping on the show today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Omar. You as well.
Hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode of the Health Coach Academy podcast. If you did, jump over to iTunes and leave a rating and or review. It goes a long way in helping get this message out to our fellow health coaches and people in our industry. Also, if you can, jump over to my website, omarcumberbatch.com, where I give out a lot of freebies, including my 5-day sugar challenge for people who are having issues with sugar. And also for health coaches, I have the book, Hidden. It's the 6 not so obvious ways to get your clients unstuck. Have a great day.